Hi, I'm Dana, and I want to be clear about something right from the start. The worst part of that week was not the emergency surgery. It wasn't even the fever that spiked the night after, or waking up with a 6-inch incision and a nurse telling me to rate my pain on a scale of 1 to 10 at 2 in the morning. The worst part was opening my banking app on a Friday afternoon, alone in a hospital room, and watching the balance load. 0. My appendix had been giving me warnings for 2 days before I finally gave in. I'd worked through the pain, told myself it was a cramp, a pulled muscle, something I ate. Until my neighbor found me folded over on the kitchen floor at 11 on a Wednesday night and drove me to the ER herself, her hand on my back the whole time, saying nothing because there was nothing useful to say. The surgery was routine, the doctor told me afterward. Routine, like the word was supposed to comfort me. They kept me overnight Thursday, then again Friday when my fever climbed, and they decided they weren't done watching me yet. By that second afternoon, I was wide awake, a little foggy on the edges from the medication, with nothing to do but lie there and look at the ceiling tiles and think about the work I was falling behind on. My mother and my brother had been staying at my apartment since Wednesday evening. My mother said she wanted to be close in case I needed anything. And in a moment of sincere, exhausted gratitude, I had handed her my spare key and told her there was food in the refrigerator. My brother came because he always came with her, drifting along in her wake, occupying my couch without asking, eating my groceries without mentioning it. I hadn't thought anything of it. She was my mother. She had a key. I opened my banking app out of habit, maybe just to have something to look at. The page loaded. I stared at it for a full 10 seconds, certain I was misreading something, that the screen was glitching, that the medication was making the numbers blur. $0 in checking. My credit card, the emergency card I kept with a low limit, and no automatic payments, the one I had mentioned to my mother, only because she said she might need to pick up medication or groceries for me, showed a balance of $3,412. On a card with a $3,500 limit. I went to the transaction history. My stomach dropped in a way that had nothing to do with the surgery. Royal Caribbean Cruise Deposit, Fort Lauderdale, $847. Shore Excursion Package, Nassau, $612. Duty-free shopping, 2 separate charges, $388. Dinner at a waterfront restaurant, $214. A shoe store charge linked to my brother's name, $265. Spee services aboard the ship, $190. More after that. I put the phone down on the blanket. I picked it back up. I dialed my mother. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice warm and open. The kind of voice she used when she assumed the call was going to go well. "Sweetheart, how are you feeling? Is the fever better?" "Where are you right now?" I asked. A small hesitation. In the background, I could hear wind. The hollow, traveling kind of wind that belongs to open water. "On the ship," she said, easy as anything. "We just left port this morning. The water is incredible, honestly, you would love." "You're on a cruise," I said. "Dana." Her tone shifted into something patient, gently worn out, like a teacher addressing a child who keeps asking the same question. "I told you we had this planned." "You told me it was in the fall," I said. "It's June." "We moved it up. The prices were better, and honestly, with everything going on with you, I thought a change of scenery would do us some good." She said it so smoothly, so entirely without self-awareness, that for one disorienting moment, I almost wondered if I'd gotten something wrong. "You moved up a cruise," I said, "while I was in the hospital, and you charged it to my credit card." Silence. "Now, let's not make this into something," she said. "You were in the hospital. You weren't going to need it. They take care of everything there." I felt something in my chest go very still. "That's not how hospitals work," I said. "And that's not the point." "Dana, you were unconscious." "I was in surgery for 2 hours. You had 3 days." "Sweetheart, I didn't want to stress you." "You didn't want to ask," I said. She didn't answer that. I hung up. I lay still for a moment with the phone resting on my chest, listening to the soft mechanical hum of the hospital. Then I opened my banking app and froze both accounts. It took 4 minutes. My hands barely shook. I should tell you that this wasn't the first time. That's important, Because when people hear a story like this, they sometimes wonder how someone could let it get this far. Why I hadn't seen it coming, why I hadn't protected myself sooner. And the answer is that I had been trained, slowly and over many years, to believe that what was happening was just how love worked when your family needed you. I was 20 years old, a sophomore in college, when my mother called me crying and told me the electricity was going to be shut off by the next morning. I sent her $400 from my work-study savings. She thanked me for it. 3 years later, when I was the one struggling to make rent, and I brought it up gently, she looked at me with complete, unperformed confusion. "I honestly don't remember that," she said. "Are you sure that happened?" I was 23 when my brother needed someone to co-sign his first apartment lease. He had no credit history. He'd had 3 jobs in 2 years and couldn't hold one long enough to build a rental track record. Every person he asked had said no. I said yes. He was my brother, and I believed it would be clean. His name on the lease, my name as backup, him paying the rent, me never having to think about it again. He lived there 8 months before he got evicted. I paid the damages, $640. He Venmo requested me for $80 a few months later and never mentioned the rest of it again. Not once. I was 26 when my mother's car insurance lapsed, and she needed someone to take over the payments, temporarily. I set up the automatic withdrawal from my checking account, told myself it was just until she got back on her feet. I did it for 2 years. I canceled it finally, after she told me she'd found a new policy, which turned out not to be true. Which I found out 4 months later when she called, asking if I could front the deposit for a new one. I said I couldn't, she cried. We didn't speak for 3 weeks, and when we did, neither of us mentioned any of it. Lying in that hospital bed, staring at the ceiling with the IV still draining into my arm, I understood something I had spent a decade carefully not understanding. I was not their daughter. I was their emergency fund, the account you draw from when everything else runs out. And I had let it continue because I had told myself, over and over, that showing up was what love looked like, that covering the gap was what family meant. But they had never once asked, they had simply taken. Every single time. I was discharged Saturday morning. My neighbor picked me up, drove me home, made me tea. My apartment was mostly clean, but the guest bathroom looked like a changing room after a concert. Wet towels on the floor, my shampoo nearly empty, a half-eaten bag of pretzels left open on the nightstand in the room my brother had slept in. I sat on my couch for a long time, just breathing. My phone buzzed, my brother. "Hey, just heard you're upset. You should know Mom was really worried about you this week. Try not to take it out on her." I set the phone face down on the coffee table and left it there. That afternoon, I called my bank. I explained what had happened. The charges made without authorization while I was hospitalized, the account drained while I was physically unable to act. The fraud department opened a case within the hour. They issued provisional credit while they investigated. I wrote down the case number, the name of the representative, the time of the call. I saved the call recording to my cloud backup. Then I sent my mother a text, not angry, specific, a short, numbered list of every charge, with the dollar amount and the date, followed by a request for a repayment plan within 10 days. She read it. She did not respond. My brother sent 3 more texts over the following 2 days. I didn't open them. Monday, I was back at work. Still sore, still careful about how I moved, but present. I was a project lead on a campaign with a deadline in 10 days, and I wasn't willing to lose any more ground. I'd spent 4 years building something real in this job, something that felt genuinely mine in a way that very little else in my life had. I was 2 hours into my morning when my manager appeared at my desk, and the look on his face stopped me mid-sentence. In his office, he turned his computer screen toward me. The email was from my address. It was sent to HR and CC'd to him, subject line, "Notice of resignation, effective immediately. Due to an ongoing family emergency, I am no longer able to continue in my current role. I appreciate the opportunity, but must step away effective today. Please consider this my formal resignation." My name, my email signature, my work address. "I didn't write this," I said. "I know," said my manager. And I realized he'd already believed me before I said it. He was the kind of person who paid attention, who knew what my writing actually sounded like. I pulled up the email header data. The sending IP address was routed through a server in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I thought of my brother, of the 3 days he'd spent at my apartment, of my laptop left open on the desk in the living room, my email logged in, because I'd never had a reason to log out. I looked at my manager. That IP address is from the same city my family was in when this was sent, I said. And I have records showing I was hospitalized at the time this email was sent. He exhaled slowly. I'll have IT pull the full authentication log. I nodded. I'd like a copy when they do. I called my brother from the parking garage. He picked up on the second ring. You sent that email, I said. A pause. I don't know what you're talking about. You logged into my laptop. You found my work contacts. You composed an email in my name and sent it to my employer. I kept my voice level, the way you keep your hands steady when you're carrying something that could spills. While I was in the hospital. Dana. While I was in the hospital, I said again. You tried to get me fired, so I'd have bigger problems than the credit card charges. So I'd be too overwhelmed to do anything about it. He was quiet. Fix it, I said. Call HR. Tell them you had access to my account and made a mistake. You have 24 hours. Or what? There was still something defiant in it, a leftover reflex, the voice of someone who had always operated under the assumption that I would eventually back down. Or I file a police report for identity theft, I said, file a separate report with the bank's fraud division for the credit card charges, and submit both case numbers to my company's legal team, along with the IP address logs. I have everything documented. The transactions, the email header, the hospitalization records. Do you want to find out what happens next? Or do you want to make one phone call? Silence. You're being insane, he said finally. 24 hours, I said, and I hung up. He called HR at 9:42 the next morning. He said he'd had access to my laptop with permission, that he'd accidentally sent a draft he hadn't meant to send, that it was a complete misunderstanding. It was thin. Everyone in that room knew it was thin, but the email was retracted. The resignation was voided, and the formal review closed in my favor 2 days later. My manager called me into his office afterward. He told me my work record was clear, that the situation had been resolved, and that he wanted me to know it had never changed how he saw me. I thanked him, went back to my desk, and sat still for a minute with my hands flat on the surface, just to feel something solid. Then my mother posted on Facebook. It wasn't subtle. It never was. Sometimes the people you sacrifice the most for are the ones who hurt you deepest. I raised my children with everything I had, and yet, here I am, being punished for 1 week, one single week, of trying to breathe. I love my daughter unconditionally. But love isn't supposed to feel like this. Please keep us in your prayers. The comments were already multiplying by the time I saw it. My aunt, her older sister, had written, "Oh no, sweetheart, call me. What happened?" Someone from her church had written, "Praying for you. Family pain is the deepest pain." 12 people had hit the heart reaction. 14 people had left sympathetic strings of words that were based entirely on her version of events, which left out every single material fact. I put my phone down. I picked it back up. I opened Facebook. I started typing, and I didn't stop until I was done. I wrote it the way I would have written a report. Dates, amounts, documentation. I noted that I had been hospitalized for emergency surgery, and that charges totaling over $3,000 had been made on my accounts during that time without my authorization. I noted that a fraudulent resignation letter had been sent from my work email using my credentials. I noted that I had filed a fraud claim with my bank, that an investigation was underway, and that the fraudulent email had been formally retracted. I attached screenshots, transaction logs, the email header with the Fort Lauderdale IP, the hospitalization dates. I wrote one final line. I'm not posting this to cause pain. I'm posting it because when someone tells a public story about you, you're allowed to tell yours. I posted it. I put my phone in my desk drawer and worked until 5. When I opened it again, there were 83 notifications. My cousin had written, "Dana, I had no idea. We're with you." My aunt had written, I called your mother. She couldn't explain the charges. I'm calling you tonight. A coworker from a previous job had written, the documentation. I'm speechless. And then my mother sent a text, not a call, a text, that said her heart had been acting up, and the stress of everything was taking a physical toll on her, that she was worried about her blood pressure, that she hoped I understood what I was doing to her health. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I called the cruise line's customer service number and asked to be connected to the onboard medical center. It took 4 minutes to reach someone. I explained that I was a family member, with a concern about a passenger's medical status. The staff member confirmed, without violating anything they shouldn't, that the passenger in question had visited the medical center for mild dehydration, had been treated and cleared, and was currently at dinner. Dinner. I set my phone down, and then I felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, but a kind of tired, final clarity, like looking at something for a long time and finally just seeing it for what it is. 3 months later, the bank completed their investigation. The charges were found to be unauthorized. $1,400 was returned to my accounts. My brother never paid back the rest. I had stopped expecting him to. I'd already decided what the ending looked like, and it didn't involve waiting on him. 6 weeks after that, my manager sat across from me and offered me a senior role, the promotion I'd been building toward for nearly 2 years. Better title, better pay, a project portfolio that was actually mine to run. 2 years ago, I would have called my mother first. I would have wanted her to be proud, wanted to hear it in her voice. Instead, I texted a friend. She sent back 15 exclamation points and a voice message of herself screaming, and it felt truer than any version of that other conversation ever would have. I booked a trip to New Orleans. Just me, 1 week in October, a city I'd been wanting to see since my early 20s and had quietly deferred every single year for reasons that, looking back, all traced to the same source. Money I didn't have because I'd given it away, plans I'd postponed because someone else needed something first. The morning I left, I was up early, packed efficiently, coffee made. I sat at my kitchen table in the quiet of 6 a.m. and did one last check of my email before heading to the airport. There was a message from my brother. Subject line, please. I read the subject line. I did not open the email. I moved it to the trash, and then, because I thought about it for another 10 seconds, I went to the trash folder and permanently deleted it. I finished my coffee. I locked my door. I drove to the airport with the windows cracked and music on, October air cool through the gap at the top of the glass. At the security checkpoint, the agent checked my ID, looked at me, and smiled. Traveling alone? She said. Yeah, I said. She handed it back. Have a wonderful trip. I picked up my bag and walked through, and for the first time in longer than I could clearly remember, there was no background calculation running in my head. No mental tab open tracking who needed what and how much I had left, and whether I could cover it. No calls coming that I was bracing for. No sense that my peace was borrowed from somewhere else. Just the gate ahead of me, and the flight, and whatever came next. It turned out that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.